a warm good morning to all of you here, and thank you for this opportunity to speak to you. So I think Bill did lay a good foundation in terms of thank you. The algorithms and what works under what circumstances. I'm going to talk a little bit towards the business side in terms of how do we make sure that organizations and businesses today get the most out of the investments that they're making on analytics. So before I start off, I would just like to, beg your pardon, I'm a little under the weather, so I might get into some bouts of coughing, so please excuse me for that. I'm under some sort of a virus, I think. So firstly, what are the businesses looking for? And when I say businesses, this is not essentially the IT organization, though we do see that more and more the wall that used to exist between business and IT has kind of disappeared. Now it's more of a homogeneous organization where IT also carries KPIs, goals which are actually business KPIs, and so does, business cannot, of course, function without IT, given the huge influx of technology that has descended on all of us in all organizations. So these are some of the questions that actually businesses want. What do they want? These are the questions that they need answers to. This is what they're looking for, in a sense. And it's not as much of what has happened, though that's also important. What has happened in the past, why it happened, but it's more of what is going to happen. How do I look into the future, sort of like a soothsayer or a palm reader kind of a function, and predict of what is going to happen next, and how can I prepare myself, how can I prepare my organization to take the right measures so that we can react in a better way, and we are prepared to act in a certain way given what is, we believe with some amount of confidence level that this is what is going to happen, and then prepare myself accordingly. So those are a set of questions. Of course, it varies across the industries, so a telecom company might, the biggest question for them is, how many of my customers am I going to retain? Who are my customers who have the highest likelihood to leave me and go somewhere else? And in the Indian context, we have seen what has happened with Reliance Jio. And then, if I'm able to have an idea about which customer segment, and Bill did talk about segmentation, right? So how, essentially it becomes, the question is a typical business question, but the solution lies in analytics. So understanding the end user concern, or what the person, the field force actually needs, is very important to actually drive home success for any analytical project that all of us in this room execute, and we probably are well aware of that. Now, as the questions, so those are just highlighting some of the questions that actually crop most often across industries. Now, having said that, and with this huge influx of technology that has come in, there's a lot of expectation from the business, so to speak, in being able to get real-time answers. So I'm using the word real-time. I know it's broadly used in certain, most contexts. But how do I get answers to these questions the moment I get that question, and to actually be able to condense the time gap between when you need some information to the time when you're actually able to give that information out to the business. That actually decides the success or failure, and sometimes that determines whether your analytical investment is branded as a success or a failure, depending on how fast were you able to churn out what was required. And what we have seen is that while most organizations have done a pretty decent job of being able to figure out and do a postmortem sort of, so to speak, of what happened, because they have huge amounts of data, they have reasonably decent tech stacks that enable, BI has been there for quite some time, and so is the talent pool available to churn out those kind of reports. So the postmortem or the analysis of what has happened in the past and why it happened, I think most organizations do a pretty decent job of that. But what the business is looking for is, what do I have to do? So there are a certain amount of recommendations. And that's where we see that there's a gap. There's a gap between what is expected and what is being delivered. And that essentially is what we are trying to call it as an insights gap. Now, this, how do you bridge this gap? So the entire, what I'm going to spend time talking about is how do we address, this gap that exists today, which probably explains why adoption of analytics has not really taken off in traditional businesses or in business houses, the way, for example, the previous speaker, Bill, showed us the driverless Uber car and the driverless bus and the drones. So you see analytics being applied in these kind of scenarios, but yet, when we come down to the brass tacks of executing a business, which is forecasting my revenue, forecasting my demand, ensuring that I have the right inventory at the right place, identifying the customer segments, being able to understand who my customer is, and accordingly devise plans to target that customer on all my marketing initiatives. Those are still, those areas still remain a little bit of, you don't really see each and every case becoming a aha moment for the business, saying that, wow, this project gave me something that I had never thought of. And that essentially is, it's not, the answer does not lie in technology. The answer lies somewhere else. And which is what I'm going to talk about in my subsequent slides. It's about understanding the perspective of the user, which is your end user, which is actually a person sitting in a business guy. And how do you make sure that you cater to the needs of this particular person and understand, kind of put yourself in his shoes, and then try to figure out how you would be able to give him what he or she wants. At the background could be machine learning algorithms. There could be different kinds of statistical models that would be running to actually derive those benefits. But unless you're able to show the results in a way that is going to be useful to that persona, that individual, analytics is pretty much going to remain relegated to the classrooms and to the labs and the research and development organizations that companies have, but you wouldn't really see it impacting business the way I think everyone expects now. So essentially, the benefits at the customer, we have to link it to how you're able to impact the end goals or the key KRIs or the KPIs on which business gets measured. Now, how do you do it? So, as much we all call it a science, there is a bit of an art to it as well. And that is only going to get bridged when you adopt a consultative model. And that's what we have learned from our experiences. That's what we have seen that yields the best result. And businesses are able to derive the right amount, the right kind of ROI that would justify the investments that are made in analytics, because we all know that it does require investment, right? You have to investment in a technology platform, you have to invest, of course, the skills, they are hard to get by, and of course, the time that's spent in nailing down what the problem is, how you're going to go about to give a solution, and then of course, testing it, productionizing it, and then measuring the outcome and how did it plan back. So that entire review, the feedback cycle has to be closed, and that's when you actually get to decide whether you got the ROI out of the project or not. So what essentially it involves is the first step is try to understand the actual problem statement, not treat the symptom, because many a times you could have multiple symptoms, you could provide a symptomatic treatment, but the problem actually is much deep-rooted and lies somewhere else. So it's very important to have that consultative approach. Repeated workshops with the business helps a lot in trying to be proactive sort of in a way, and try to understand what is the exact problem that is being faced. You could say that, I have two less number of segments for my customer, for example. Is that a problem? Is it that your data is pretty noisy, or you haven't considered all the data sets that are available? There could be some third-party data sets. There could be something that's available within your organization that probably not tapping into. And sometimes it becomes a cross-division, cross-department, cross-function exercise if you get into this consultative mode of trying to understand what the root cause, the real problem is. And then inadvertently it doesn't remain a sales and marketing problem, but it actually rises one step further, one step above, and then you probably will be able to get buy-in from other stakeholders, who do not necessarily belong to the CMO organization, but people, let's say, operational planning, sometimes the CFOs as well, because that's where the budgets come from. So it's very important that we get an understanding of what exactly the problem is. So that will tell us where do we need to start from, and then outline the problem, and then try to give, come out with solutions. One problem could branch out to multiple threads of problem statements that need to be addressed. So the next slide, we are going to talk about how do we go about bridging the gap. Now, while analytical projects typically start off as small projects, and that's the way it should be, that's what is recommended, the way, what we have seen that works out, not go with a big bang approach, but actually start small. But the success or the proof of the pudding is when you're able to operationalize that one POC across a larger set of users, impacting a larger set of field force, for example, or a larger set of business stakeholders. That's when the initiative that has started off as a one-time project actually sustains itself, and that's when the ROI on analytics, because we keep hearing this all the time that, I invested X amount of money on an analytics project. I wanted to get a 360-degree view of my customer. I wanted to understand what are my customer segments, but I didn't really, it didn't really yield the results that I was looking for. The trick to getting results is the operationalization of this analytics, so to speak. And that cannot happen unless each and every person on the ground who's which is the user community here, using the insights that are delivered out of your analytics project, are actually convinced of the results and they put it to use. Unless it's being put to use, it could just be a scientific experiment that never, so to speak, hits the ground, or is, you don't implement it, so, forget about being able to capture what did you get in return and do a pre and post comparison and be able to figure out that, yes, this was my improvement over what used to happen earlier when I did not have this model or when in place, or I had not embarked on this particular project. So our approach is essentially a very simple approach. You identify the problem first, you get into, and the problem is actually an evolving statement, so to speak. It's not in the first stage that you start off, and most of analytics projects follow the agile model or a DevOps kind of a situation where you have to work closely with the people who are supposed to benefit from this project. And it cannot be a one-time exercise that you decide that, okay, I understood, and I go back to my kitchen and I cook the dish and present it to you. That's not what happens in practical scenarios. So the definition of the problem also evolves over a period of time as everyone gets more clarity of the situation which we have at hand and what are we expecting in the future. Prioritization of what needs to be done. Sometimes when you talk to business, you come out with a laundry list of things that people would want to be addressed or that they're expecting this project to deliver. It's very important to prioritize what comes first and what can wait. Because unless the low-hanging fruits you deliver the low-hanging fruits first, sooner or later business is going to run out of patience on a long drawn analytics project which hasn't really delivered anything to them. So the trick is to be able to deliver piecemeal outputs and stitch all of those together, and finally when you have few successes under your belt, that's when you can actually thread all of them together and then say that this is now going to be my solution, or this is going to be my analytics, the definition of all that I will do as part of this project, and then drive the operationalization, of course. That's when you will get to the next stage, which is about figuring out what platforms. Do you need a platform? Do you need to make some investments that are a little, drawn out into the future and not just from a small project perspective. So that's how the gap can be bridged, and it can only be bridged when there is it's operationalized, and each and every person who actually belongs to the user community, the user of this. When I say user community, it's people who are actually using the output of your project. When each and every person, you have a brand ambassador in each one of them, that's when you actually see the whole organization depending on analytics. Otherwise, you would always have these one-off people running their own Excels, doing things out of gut feel. I think before the session started, there were a few quotes that were being shown here, and one of them was that, either it's guesswork or you're lucky, right? That's how traditional businesses have been operating more often than not. And of course, with a little bit of hindsight as to what happened in the past. So, you have your gut feel or the tribal knowledge, and based on that, you take decisions. But I think there's a huge engine here that can deliver, actually help them take decisions. And the sooner they adopt that, we all are convinced, but the sooner we are able to convince business, and the only way to do it is actually go through this process in this way and be able to tie it to what are their immediate needs or what are their goals. Unless you're able to tie it to their KPIs, just saying that I'm going to improve your customer, your segments are going to be much better, or I'm going to give you 4 or 5 segments, is not going to solve the problem for anyone. So I kind of covered some of it. What you see right now projected on the slide is actually start small. We do see in today's world, because of the, there's a lot of enthusiasm on analytics, and organizations embark on a big bang approach of trying to scale up or start off and not exactly scale up, but start off at in a larger scale. That doesn't typically work. So our suggestion is that you start small, do it with small proof of concepts, small projects that actually gets the business to understand what to expect and to understand the entire cycle of an analytics project, because that is very important. The feedback loop and how your algorithms can get better or your model gets better over a period of time, because you're capturing new amount of data, you have, you do your test and you have got some results and you feed that back into your model, and your model becomes better. So it's very important that people, business also understands that it's a cyclical process. It's not a one-time, I run something and I get a set of, let's say, a target set of customers, and that's the end of it. I think Bill also referred to that. The feedback loop is extremely important, and that really determines whether this project is going to sustain over a period of time, and whether it's going to be reused over and over again by the business. So start small, do, and eventually then, it's actually a 7-step process. I will not read out the 7 steps because they're there on the slide for all of you to see. But essentially, you think about scaling only after there are successes or pockets of successes. You might not have 100% success across the, across the field, but there are pockets of successes, and then you're able to stitch them together, and that's when you should actually get into, we tell organizations to actually then think of a platform, think of let's say a data lake implementation, and that's when you should get onto that journey, not early on when the value of the analytical projects or the analytics projects has not been shown and is not accepted by the business. So once it's accepted, then funding is not a problem. You get the funds because business is hungry for more. They have seen this kind of tasted blood, and they're thirsty for more. So funding is not a problem, buying is not a problem. You have people who are already using the results, and they have effectively been using the results. So there is ROI to be, there's benefits that can be shown. You already have some successes under your belt, so you can just show that and say that, these are the successes, or this is what I can plan for in the future. And that's when the platform, the data lake, your huge investments in being able to drive this, drive analytics as a separate engine itself will actually be successful. So I'll now talk about a little bit, I'm kind of halfway through my time. So I'll talk about our approach to, how do we help organizations in becoming a business outcome-driven enterprise. So this is something which is called the DIIRE framework, which actually helps organizations traverse all that I talked about until now. So start right from where you have bits and pieces of data, you don't know what is useful, what is not useful, what can be done with it. Essentially it's like a fuzzy situation. So how do we take you from, I'm sorry. Yeah. So how do we take you from there? Start with your data, which is maybe sparse or maybe scattered, and get information out of it. Of course, data means information. Insights, which is, secrets that the data is holding. And then, of course, recommendation and the execution on the recommendations. So this entire framework helps you walk through that entire loop, actually close that loop, because I earlier spoke about how important it is to close the loop. And essentially, it is driven on three basic fundamentals, which is how do you simplify, more of simplification, more of automation, and then of course the intelligence, which is your the models that are running underneath. So the automation part, you could, again, at each and every stage, how do you simplify stuff? So you could have, embedded functions. Largely depends on how you're organized as an organization. So there is some amount of play that can be exercised here. How do you define your, how boxed in is your framework? It should not be boxed in. You should be able to bring in new data sources as and when, because it's a changing landscape, we all know that. And if you have a framework that allows for you to add in different elements, that framework, your entire design will be there to stay for sufficient amount of time in the future. Automation, you could have bots. There are there's a play of bots here where the tasks can be run by the bots. What doesn't need to be done by people, essentially doesn't have to be done by them. Data ingestion is something that can be automated. So, I'll talk to subsequent slides where we'll talk about a platform. Essentially, this framework has yielded the results that you see over there. We have actually been able to see a 20% faster time to market in terms of when you embarked on an analytical journey to when you were able to get benefits out of it. And of course, this 25% reduction in cost of ownership, which of course is, enthuses the CFOs everywhere. The next one is another concept or a framework, which is the Big Data Ready Enterprise. Now, having, I earlier talked about investment in platforms and big data or a data lake. So now that that part of the journey is done, this is where we can help organizations, or this framework actually can help organizations in getting big data ready. Essentially 5 steps that you can, in which this framework allows organizations to embark on that journey, because now that you have seen success of your analytics projects that you have done, and you've somehow operationalized it. Next is, my data is growing, I have a lot of structured and unstructured data coming in, then of course, I need a data lake or some sort of a big data environment. So this is again the framework, and of course the benefits are stated over there. 40% reduction in development time, 35% in testing effort, and of course 60% reduction in deployment effort. And there's some accolades that we got on this as well. Now this is the data discovery platform. So now that you have big data, you're ready on that, I did speak about a platform. So essentially you have operationalized analytics to a level where the adoption is there, the levels of adoption are pretty high, and you should now not have a separate team that churns out this, but it should be actually made open to your business users. It's kind of a self-service model. What you need, you get onto the platform, get it out for yourself. So that's the next stage of maturity, let me call it. And the data discovery platform helps you with that. It takes care of data ingestion, all kinds of data manipulation. It's available on the cloud as well. And of course, again, the benefits are, which again help in operationalization of analytics and making sure that this is not a one-time project for someone which is close to someone's heart and got executed and people talked about it, but it's a self-sustaining model that grows over a period of time and stays there and continuously delivers to business on outcomes that are being expected by the enterprise. Of course, how do the insights come from DDP? Of course, there's a lot of analysis of what has happened in the past and why it happened, and what, of course, recommendations on what do I do out of it. And this is delivered through, there are visualization dashboards. How do you visualize it? So, like I said, it's a self-service model. Business users can just pick off the platform and get answers to whatever they're looking for. And of course, there are a lot of packaged components which come as part of this platform. Now, again, it's an app-driven platform available on the cloud as well and on-prem. So there is a laundry list of apps that are available across business functions that can be used. Of course, there are customizations. We keep getting requests from customers on customization, and of course, that's possible too. That's done, and as we speak, the number of apps keeps on increasing on a daily, monthly, weekly basis. So this is just a proof of, unless you hear it from the business, you can't really say that, no point in me coming here and saying that this is how it should be done and this is how you'll get success. So this is for a large state-owned power organization in Australia, where the fault prediction of their lines was done using this platform. And that's the benefit that was delivered to the customer. Essentially, they walked this entire journey of doing a POC, all that I have talked about until now. And the benefit was there for everyone to see. So that's all that I had. I would just want to leave you with one video, and not to publicize my organization in any way, but just to prove that unless you hear it from the business that this is great and I did get the results that I was looking for, we cannot help organizations in moving towards, in adopting analytics to move towards business outcome-driven organization. That's what organizations are looking for. I am convinced that analytics is the key to that, but of course we have to hear it from the customer. I can take a couple of questions.
Yes, we are out of time, but we can take one or two questions. You can raise your hand, we'll have a mic passed on. There's a question there.
Pinky, you rightly explained how a small project can lead into an organization transformation. Just one opinion from you. Is it the solution or is it the culture that we really need?
Pardon me?
Is it the solution or the culture which we should be driving now?
It's actually a mix of both. I did talk about the art and science part. So the art part is that actually navigating organizations, and it involves a lot of things that don't necessarily fall under the purview of analytics. For example, being able to identify the right stakeholders, the influencers, right? And sometimes for organizations, they want to do it, but it's a big change management challenge for them as well, right? Because people have been used to operate in a certain way. There are Excel, individual versions of Excels on each and every person's desktop, and they think that my way of doing things, and I have been doing this for last n number of years, so what can a tool tell me that I don't already know? So these are things that have to be changed, and which is why I said that it's important to show those initial wins, because that's where you those help you to garner support and convert those naysayers to I-sayers. Thank you.